How your eye?
Oh, it's cool.
Damn! Put your glasses back on.
It came out of nowhere. A low-budget comedy set on one block, shot in less than a month, starring a rapper and a fast-talking unknown. Nobody expected much. And then it became one of the most quoted, most loved, most enduring black films in American history. These are 21 weird, wild, and mostly forgotten facts about Friday, the 1995 classic that changed everything. Before we get into it, comment below your favorite Friday quote. And if you are new here, please click like and subscribe for more content just like this. Number 1. Ice Cube wrote the entire script in less than 3 weeks. This is the one that surprises people the most. You would think a film this tight, this quotable, this fully realized, took months to develop. Nope. Ice Cube sat down and knocked out the script for Friday in under 3 weeks flat. He did it from frustration. After leaving NWA and going through years of legal battles and industry drama, Ice Cube was in a headspace where he needed to create something that felt true to where he came from. He was tired of seeing South Central Los Angeles portrayed either as a war zone or a punchline in films that had no real connection to the community. He wanted to show a Friday, a nothing special day, just two guys on a porch watching the neighborhood go by. And the speed at which he wrote it only added to how raw and unpolished and honest the dialogue felt. You cannot overthink something written that fast. What came out was exactly what the neighborhood actually sounded like. Number 2, DJ Pooh co-wrote the script, and he barely gets credit for it. Ice Cube gets all the shine when people talk about Friday, which is fair because it was his vision and his name on the poster. But DJ Pooh, whose real name is Mark Jordan, sat across from Cube in those writing sessions and contributed just as much to the voice of the film. Pooh grew up in South Central and had the same instinctive understanding of block life, of the rhythms of conversation between people who had nothing to do on a given day except watch the world move around them. The two of them would bounce dialogue back and forth until something cracked them up, and if it cracked them up, it stayed. It was built in real time, together, and yet, decades later, most casual fans of the film have no idea who DJ Pooh even is. Number 3. The entire movie was filmed in only 20 days. 20 days. Think about that. Most major studio productions spend 20 days shooting a single action sequence. Friday was written fast, yes, but the shoot itself was equally compressed, and somehow it does not show. Director F. Gary Gray kept things moving at a pace that might have seemed reckless to anyone else, but he understood that the naturalism he was going for required speed. You cannot let a comedy breathe too long between takes without the energy dying. Every scene had to feel like it happened the first time, like nobody was waiting for the cameras to roll. Shooting the whole thing in 20 days forced every performer to stay sharp, stay present, and trust their instincts. John Witherspoon, who played Craig's father Willie Jones, was a powerhouse improviser, and a compressed schedule like this played directly into his strengths. He had to find a scene immediately. That urgency, that aliveness, is all over the final film. Number 4. F. Gary Gray was only 25 years old when he directed Friday. The man behind one of the most iconic comedies in black cinema history was 25 years old when he made it. Gray had come up directing music videos for Ice Cube, a training ground that teaches visual economy and fast performance extraction, and the two had already built a shorthand before they ever stepped onto a film set together. But Friday was still a massive leap. Music videos are 90 seconds. Friday was 90 minutes. Gray had to sustain tone, manage ensemble performances, and make a film that felt alive from beginning to end, all while being younger than most of the people around him. He pulled it off so completely that most people who watch Friday today have no idea they are watching the work of a 25-year-old first-time feature director. Gray went on to direct Set It Off, The Italian Job, Straight Outta Compton, and Fate of the Furious. But Friday is still the film people bring up first. Number 5. The budget was only $3.5 million. $3.5 million in 1995 was barely anything for a feature film. New Line Cinema greenlit the project with a modest investment and almost no expectations. They were taking a small swing on a low-risk project, that might do decent numbers in urban markets and then disappear quietly. What happened instead was that Friday made over $27 million at the domestic box office against that $3.5 million budget. That is nearly an 8-to-1 return. By any metric in Hollywood, that is an extraordinary result, and it was achieved without a massive marketing campaign, without a wide release strategy built around a blockbuster opening weekend, and without a single explosion or CGI shot. Just a porch, two guys, and a neighborhood that Hollywood had been ignoring for years. Number 6. Chris Tucker was not the first choice for Smokey. This is almost impossible to imagine now. Chris Tucker as Smokey is one of the most perfect pieces of casting in comedy history. But Tucker was not who Ice Cube originally had in mind when he was writing the role. Several names were floated early on, and Tucker was a relative unknown at the time, a stand-up comedian who had done some minor TV work but had not broken through in any significant way. When Tucker came in and performed, something clicked immediately. His energy, the way he talked with his whole body, the speed of his delivery, the way he could play desperation for laughs without losing the audience's sympathy. All of it was exactly what Smokey needed to be. Once Tucker was in, the character of Smokey expanded in ways it might not have with anyone else. Tucker brought a dimension to every scene that elevated the people around him, and that is the rarest quality in a comedy performer. Number 7. Chris Tucker turned down Next Friday for religious reasons. After Friday turned Chris Tucker into a legitimate star, the obvious next move was for him to come back for the sequel. He did not. Tucker gave interviews over the years explaining that by the time Next Friday was being developed, he had deepened his Christian faith to the point where he was uncomfortable with the content the character of Smokey represented. The smoking, the drug humor, the certain looseness of morality that made Smokey so funny. All of that sat uneasily with where Tucker was spiritually. He walked away from a significant payday. Tucker was replaced in Next Friday by Mike Epps, who did solid work, but the absence of Smokey is something that hangs over both sequels. The chemistry between Tucker and Ice Cube was never replicated. Ice Cube has been asked about it in nearly every major interview he has done since. Number 8. Tiny Zeus Lister Jr., the man who played Debo, was a legitimate college football player. When you look at Debo on screen, the size, the menace, the way he moves through a scene like he owns the air around him, it makes complete sense that Tommy Lister Jr. played the character. But what you might not know is that Lister was a genuinely accomplished athlete before he ever got in front of a camera. He played college football at Westmont College in Cal State, Los Angeles, where his physical presence was just as imposing as anything he brought to the screen. Lister had already appeared in a handful of films before Friday, but Debo was the role that burned his face into the cultural memory. People have reported being legitimately afraid to approach him in public for years after the film. He was, by all accounts from people who worked with him, one of the most gentle and good-natured people on set. The gap between Debo and the actual Tommy Lister Jr. was enormous, which is a testament to what a genuinely skilled performer he was. Number 9. The house used in the film was a real house on a real street in South Central Los Angeles, and fans still show up to visit it. The production did not build a set. They found a real residential street in the Crenshaw area of South Central and shot the film on location. The house that served as Craig's home, the porch where he and Smokey spend most of the film, is a real house that real people live in. And since Friday has maintained such a consistent cultural presence over the decades, fans still drive to that street to take photos in front of it. The residents have had mixed feelings about it. Some have been accommodating. Others have found the ongoing pilgrimages a considerable intrusion on their daily lives. There is something genuinely poetic about a movie built around the idea of neighborhood and community having its filming location become a kind of neighborhood landmark in its own right. Number 10. John Witherspoon improvised a significant portion of his dialogue throughout the film. Willie Jones, Craig's father, is one of the most purely funny characters in the entire film. The bathroom monologue alone has been quoted, referenced, and parodied for 30 years. John Witherspoon was a veteran comedian with decades of stand-up experience before he walked onto the Friday set, and F. Gary Gray gave Witherspoon the room to find things in the moment. Witherspoon had a gift for finding the exact point where a character's logic becomes absurd, and then committing to that absurdity with absolute sincerity. Willie Jones never thought he was being funny. He was always completely serious. That gap between intention and result is where all the comedy lived, and Witherspoon knew exactly how to widen that gap without ever breaking the spell. He passed away in 2019, and the Friday community mourned him deeply. Number 11. Ice Cube based the character of Craig Jones directly on himself. Craig basically is Ice Cube, filtered through a specific imaginative lens. Cube has talked about how the character reflected his own experience of what it felt like to be a young man in South Central, with a lot of potential and not a lot of obvious direction, watching time pass from a porch while the neighborhood moved around him. The scene where Craig gets fired on his day off via a phone call he receives while sitting at home is based on something that actually happened to Ice Cube. The specific humiliation of that moment, the powerlessness of being let go without even being given the dignity of doing it in person, stuck with him. Craig's arc throughout the film, which is essentially about choosing not to become the thing the neighborhood expects you to become, was deeply personal for Ice Cube. The ending, where Craig puts down the gun, is not just a plot point. For Cube, it was a statement. Number 12. Regina King was already a veteran actress with years of television experience before Friday, but the film gave her a whole new audience. Regina King had been working steadily since she was a teenager, most famously as Brenda on 227, a sitcom that ran from 1985 to 1990. Friday reached an entirely different demographic and introduced King to an audience that had not grown up watching 227. Playing Felicia, the neighbor who gives the film one of its most enduring pieces of pop culture vocabulary, was not a large role, but King brought a clarity and a specificity to the character that made her memorable in a way the script alone could not have produced. She went on to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for If Beale Street Could Talk in 2018, which is about as far as you can travel from a brief comedic role in a low-budget 1995 comedy. But Friday is always somewhere in the conversation when people talk about her career. Number 13. The phrase "Bye Felicia" was essentially a throwaway line that became one of the most widely used dismissals in modern American language. Ice Cube has expressed genuine amazement at how that particular line exploded the way it did. In the film, it is a small moment. Felicia comes to the door asking to borrow something. Craig dismisses her with 2 words and the scene moves on. Nobody on set treated it as a moment of particular significance. And then, for reasons that are difficult to fully explain with logic, the phrase embedded itself in American culture and stayed there. By the 2000s, it had crossed every demographic boundary imaginable. People who had never seen Friday, who had never had any particular connection to Black cinema or South Central Los Angeles, were using "Bye Felicia" as a casual dismissal in everyday conversation. It appeared in boardrooms, in political commentary, on network television shows with absolutely no connection to the source material. The line became a piece of living language, which is something that happens to almost no line from any film ever. That it came from a 2-second throwaway moment in a 20-day shoot on a $3.5 million budget is one of the genuine miracles of American pop culture. Number 14. The film was almost given an NC-17 rating because of the drug content. The MPAA had concerns about Friday's depiction of marijuana use, specifically around how casually and positively it was portrayed. There were back and forth discussions about specific scenes that would need to be altered or removed for the film to receive the R rating it needed. New Line Cinema and the filmmakers had to navigate those conversations carefully. The final cut that made it to theaters retained enough of the original material to feel true to what the movie was trying to be, but there were compromises made along the way. The version of Friday that audiences saw in 1995 was not exactly the version that Ice Cube and F. Gary Gray originally cut. The broader unrated version of certain scenes has circulated among fans for years. Number 15. Bernie Mac had a scene cut from the final film that would have significantly expanded his role. Bernie Mac appears in Friday in a brief but absolutely memorable role. Every second he is on screen is a small explosion of personality, but the original cut had more of him. A scene was removed for pacing reasons, not performance. Mac was already a respected figure in stand-up comedy circles when Friday was made, but he had not yet broken through to the mainstream in the way he eventually would with the original Kings of Comedy and then the Bernie Mac Show. What is certain is that Mac made an enormous impression with the limited screen time he had, which is exactly the kind of thing that true star power does. Number 16. Ice Cube's real family members appeared in the film. The production could not afford to cast extras in every scene, so the filmmakers leaned heavily on friends, community members, and in some cases, actual family. Ice Cube's real-life relatives appeared in the background of several scenes, and some of them were given small speaking moments. This practice of using real community members and family in a film set in that community added to the texture of authenticity that Friday radiated. The extras did not look like Hollywood extras. They looked like the actual neighborhood, because in many cases, they were the actual neighborhood. Later filmmakers like Ryan Coogler would cite this same approach as an influence on their own work. Friday demonstrated that the people who lived the world you were depicting were also the best people to populate that world on screen. Number 17. Nia Long almost was not cast in the film. The role of Debbie, Craig's love interest and the woman who represents a kind of aspiration and potential in his life, required someone who could hold the screen without a lot of scenes to work with. Nia Long, who was primarily known at the time for her work on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, was not a certainty for the role. There were other actresses considered, and the casting process was more competitive than the film's modest profile might suggest. Long brought a warmth and a groundedness to Debbie that the role needed. She made you understand immediately why Craig would see something worth reaching toward in this woman, and she did it without the film ever giving her a great deal of screen time to build the case. Being in a film that people still talk about 30 years later is rarer than it sounds. Number 18. The movie established a template for hood comedies that shaped black cinema for the next 2 decades. Before Friday, the dominant visual language of films set in South Central Los Angeles was defined almost entirely by films like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. Those are genuinely important films with real artistic merit. But they created an expectation that stories set in that geography had to carry a certain weight, a certain inevitability of tragedy, a certain way of dramatizing violence and consequence. Friday did not reject that reality. The threat of violence is present throughout the film, and the stakes around Debo and the gun and Craig's choice at the end are real, but it refused to make that the whole picture. It insisted that the people who lived in that neighborhood also laughed, also wasted time, also had fathers who were funny about the bathroom, also had crushes and petty rivalries and ordinary days where nothing much happened. That insistence on the full humanity of its characters, rather than just the suffering parts, opened a door that dozens of films walked through in the years that followed. Friday did not just make people laugh. It changed what was considered possible in the genre. Number 19. The film was shot almost entirely during daylight hours, which was a deliberate creative choice. Most films set in environments associated with crime and danger default to nighttime cinematography. Night means danger. Night means something bad is about to happen. F. Gary Gray and his cinematographer Jerry Lively made a conscious decision to set nearly the entire film in broad daylight, which sounds simple, but is actually a significant artistic statement. Daylight in Friday meant that nothing is hidden. The neighborhood is not a place of shadows and menace. It is a place where the sun shines and neighbors walk by and kids play, and time moves slowly on a hot afternoon. That choice stripped away the visual shorthand that audiences were used to associating with South Central and replaced it with something that felt more like a portrait and less like a warning. It created a specific visual warmth, a golden quality to the light that runs through the whole film that makes it feel comfortable in a way that is almost subversive given the context. Number 20. The film has been selected for preservation by the United States National Film Registry. The Library of Congress adds films to the National Film Registry when they are deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And most popular films never make the cut. Friday was selected for preservation, which is a formal acknowledgement by one of the country's most prestigious cultural institutions that the film matters beyond its box office performance or its place in comedy history. The film is considered a document worth protecting for future generations, which is exactly what it has always been. A document of a place, a time, a way of life, and a community that Hollywood had been content to either ignore or misrepresent for decades. Number 21. Ice Cube had to fight the studio to keep the ending the way he wrote it. The ending of Friday, where Craig puts down the gun and chooses to fight Debo with his hands rather than pull the trigger, was not universally embraced by everyone at New Line Cinema. There were people in the studio who felt that the audience wanted a more viscerally satisfying conclusion, that Debo needed to be dealt with in a way that felt appropriately forceful. Ice Cube pushed back hard. The whole point of Craig's arc, the whole reason he gets fired at the beginning and spends the film in this state of drift and indecision, is that he is being tested in ways both large and small about what kind of man he is going to be. The gun is a shortcut. It is the neighborhood's answer to everything, the thing that always seems to be available when patience and courage are not. For Craig to put it down is for Craig to become someone. Ice Cube understood that if he let the studio talk him into the easy ending, he would lose the soul of everything he had built. The film ends the way it was meant to end, and 30 years later, that ending is still discussed and celebrated as one of the most quietly powerful moments in American comedy. Not because anything explodes, but because a young man from South Central puts down a gun and uses his hands. That is the whole movie right there. Friday made $27 million on a $3.5 million budget. It launched the careers of Chris Tucker and F. Gary Gray. It gave John Witherspoon one of his most beloved roles. It put Bye Felicia in the American language permanently. It changed what was considered possible in black cinema. And it did all of that in 20 days, on one block, with a first-time director who was 25 years old. Not bad for a Nothing Special Friday. If you want more deep dives on classic black films that Hollywood has been sleeping on, hit subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.